all that going on at the same time is the Bar Kochba revolt. And if you are Jewish and you do not swear allegiance to Bar Kochba, who's declared to be the Messiah in the 130s, guess what? You're going to be put to potentially death. People forget that the Jewish community at large persecuted the early Messianic Jewish believers in the 2nd century. This created a rock and a hard place. I mean, really, it's something that we don't have to deal with today. But they had to deal with it at that time. And out of that kind of spun this kind of a Gentile version that really got stripped away from its Jewish roots of faith in Yeshua. And we had a bishop in the late 2nd century that said, well, we got to figure out a term because this ecclesia is used in the Tanakh to describe the Old Testament people of God, the Jewish people. So what's this new term? We'll call ourselves Keri Oikos. Keri, Lord, Oikos, house, the house of the Lord. And it has its roots in that term. So I want to just set the record straight that church is not a bad term. But some people in the Messianic Jewish community have struggled with it. And at the same time, there is, in a sense, a call for us, if we want to contextualize the gospel in its Jewish roots, there is this tendency to say, look, maybe we shouldn't use the term church. Maybe it should be assembly. Maybe it should be synagogue. But guess what? The Jewish community is not going to recognize this as a synagogue. You know that? I think some people struggle with that. If this is truly a synagogue and it's not recognized by the Jewish community as a synagogue, then what is this supposed to be if that's really what we're called to be? And I think it's important that we stay grounded in biblical thought and not put things in regards to terminology on something and convey a meaning with it that doesn't necessarily have to be that. The early community of faith is called the assembly, the kahila, the ecclesia, the church. And I understand that it's a term that later came along in the 2nd century, but it's not some kind of pagan term. I hope that we can set the record straight on that. And so it is the pillar of truth of the living God. And what's the passage, though, that I really want us to meditate on, to think about what the kahila is and what the assembly is, and I want to focus on Ephesians 5. So you can turn there with me if you will. I'm just going to read this passage here. What does it mean? Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5, and I'm actually going to begin in verse 18. I'm going to begin in verse 18. And this is Shaul, Rav Shaul. Now, there are a lot of Jewish people living in the area of Ephesus at this time that are believers. In those days, the assembly was much more Jewish than it is today. So there are Jews living throughout the diaspora outside of the land of Israel. But then there are a lot of Gentiles that have been incorporated into this. And Paul is trying to give a practical way for how to live out your faith in Yeshua. And in verse 18, he says this, "Do not be drunk with wine," that is recklessness or dissipation. "Instead, be filled with the Ruach." Be filled with the Spirit. It's a commandment, right? Be filled with the Spirit. He doesn't say wait on some kind of special gift to be bestowed upon you or wait to have some kind of manifestation. He says be filled with the Spirit. It's an imperative. And in Greek, when you have an imperative, you have a list of participles that follow after that. For language people, that is a verbal noun that tells you how to do it. So Paul actually tells us how to be Spirit-filled. He actually gives instruction on it. You can live it. This, by the way, is the only place in the New Testament where it commands you to be filled with the Spirit. And it's an imperative. Be filled with the Spirit. Don't be drunk. Be filled with the Spirit. And then here's how to do it. Verse 19, it tells us a string of verbal nouns of how to live a Spirit-filled life. speaking to one another. You see that? ING. Anytime you see an ING statement, a going, walking, speaking, that is a participle. That is a verbal noun. You speak and you do. Verse 19 says, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. That's one way to be Spirit-filled. That's one way to be Spirit-filled. Singing and making music in your heart to the Lord. That's the other thing. It's maybe those are kind of maybe related to one another. Always giving thanks in everything to God the Father in the name of the Lord Yeshua the Messiah. Now, many people will kind of put a period on it right there. In the Greek, it's not there. It continues going.